They were locked in the most escape-proof prison the Nazis had, a medieval fortress perched on a cliff, surrounded by guards, walls, and a sheer drop into a ravine. Colditz Castle was meant to crush any hope of escape, but for a few daring Allied officers, it became the birthplace of one of the most incredible escape plans in history. It all began in 1943, when British pilot Bill Goldfinch and engineer Jack Best came up with an outrageous idea. If they couldn't break out through the walls, they would go over them. And not just climb, fly, with no metal tools, no blueprints, and no guarantee of survival. The plan? Build a two-person glider from bed slats, floorboards, and stolen materials. Launch it from the castle roof. Glide silently across the river and land in freedom. It would require absolute secrecy, nerves of steel, and months of tireless effort. Inside Colditz, the British prisoners had set up what they called the Escapers Committee. Any escape plan had to go through it. This wasn't just reckless desperation. It was organized, methodical, and strategic. The glider idea was approved. The materials, bed slats, floorboards, stolen nails, and even porridge, which they used as glue. They needed fabric for the wings, so they used old sleeping bags, uniforms, and whatever scraps they could scavenge. For weeks they dismantled anything that could be used and always covered their tracks. Everything was done in silence. They communicated in code, used lookouts to avoid detection, and hid the glider behind a fake wall that blended perfectly with the attic. One mistake, one creak at the wrong time, and the entire project could be discovered. Meanwhile, they studied physics and aerodynamics using a single book, Aircraft Design, by C.H. Latimer Needham. Smuggled in by the Red Cross, this book became their guide to flight. They calculated wingspan, lift and weight ratios by candlelight, drawing diagrams in chalk and measuring each part with handmade rulers. They even built a flight simulator. Yes, a simulator. Inside a Nazi prison. They mounted a seat on springs and practiced the launch sequence to train for balance and control. It wasn't just brilliant, it was insane. As 1944 rolled in, the glider began to take shape. It was 19 feet long with a 33-foot wingspan. It had no engine, of course. It was designed to be launched by a runway on the roof, using a bathtub full of concrete as a counterweight. When released, the bathtub would drop, pulling a rope that flung the glider forward like a slingshot. They tested the runway mechanics over and over, making sure everything was perfect. Timing, balance, tension. They couldn't afford to be wrong. If the glider didn't fly, they'd fall straight into the ravine, or be captured immediately. The Colditz cock was nearly complete, hidden in the attic, wings folded, every piece perfectly measured, down to the last wooden pin. The escape was planned for the spring of 1945. The launch window was narrow. They had to wait for the right moment. Nighttime, clear skies, and as few guards as possible. But before they could take flight, everything changed. In April 1945, American forces approached Colditz Castle. The war was ending. The Nazis were retreating. Liberation was days away. The glider team made a difficult decision. They would not risk the flight. With freedom so close, the gamble was no longer worth it. The Colditz cock was never launched. It remained hidden in the attic as Allied troops stormed the castle. The prisoners were freed. The war ended. The glider, it disappeared into history. For decades the story sounded like a myth. Too good to be true. A secret glider in a Nazi castle? Come on. But then, in the 1970s, the original plans were discovered. The exact blueprints, the notes, the diagrams, everything. And in 2000, a team of modern engineers rebuilt the Colditz cock using only the materials and techniques the prisoners had access to. They launched it from a hill using the same weight drop system the POWs designed. And it flew. It actually flew. The Colditz glider was real. The science was sound. The escape could have worked. To this day, the Colditz cock remains one of the most extraordinary escape plans in history. It combined engineering, courage, and sheer defiance against the Nazi regime. These men didn't just dream of freedom. They built it, wing by wing, board by board. They were prisoners, but they never surrendered their spirit. They built a glider with their bare hands, inside a prison, surrounded by guards, and they came within days of flying it to freedom. This wasn't just an escape plan, it was a message to their captors. You can cage our bodies, but never our minds. But what made the Colditz glider even more remarkable wasn't just the ingenuity. It was the environment in which it was built. Prisoners in Colditz weren't just confined. They were psychologically broken down. Isolation, rationed food, frigid winters, and constant surveillance were daily life. Yet somehow, within that suffocating atmosphere, these men dreamed of flight. Every nail they stole, Every board they lifted from the floor, every moment they worked in that attic, they were committing treason in the eyes of the Nazis. If caught, they could have been executed as spies. But that didn't stop them. In fact, it fueled them. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about beating the system. About showing the enemy that the human spirit, once set on freedom, cannot be locked behind walls. There's another layer to this story. One few people know. The glider wasn't only meant to carry two men, it was a symbol. If it worked, if those two pilots made it across the river to safety, the Allies could use it as proof that Colditz was vulnerable. Future missions could extract more POWs. The plan was bigger than two lives. It was about hope for everyone inside those walls. And the German guards? Many of them had no idea. Some, ironically, respected the prisoners' tenacity. In Colditz, there was a strange code of honor. Escape was considered fair play. If prisoners managed to get out without killing or bribing guards, even German officers admired the effort. But not all were so kind. There were close calls, times when the attic was nearly discovered. Once a guard nearly stumbled into the false wall. Another time, the wiring for their secret lighting system sparked unexpectedly during an inspection. Each time, the prisoners held their breath. Every day the glider survived was a miracle. And every night, the builders risked everything to keep building. Their final concern was landing. Once they launched the glider, it would need to land on the far side of the Mulde River, beyond German lines. If the wind was wrong, if the glider tilted too far, they'd crash into rocks or trees. Death wasn't just possible, it was likely. But they were ready to try. They were willing to die chasing freedom rather than rot in a cage. After liberation, many of the prisoners returned home quietly. Some never told their families the full extent of the Colditz glider story. It was too painful. Others, like Goldfinch and Best, spoke openly about it, ensuring that the world would one day know what happened in that attic. Today, the Colditz cock has been reconstructed not once but twice. Each time, it flew. Each time, it proved that the dream these men dared to build in secret was more than possible. It was genius. So when history books focus on the big battles, the tanks, the generals, the politics, remember Colditz. Remember the attic, the stolen bed slats, the hidden diagrams, the men who risked death for the sky. Because sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is to dream beyond your walls, even when those walls are made of stone. If this story moved you, if you believe the world needs more untold stories of courage, creativity, and defiance, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to SB Tells, and hit the bell so you never miss a story that history almost forgot. What would you have done in their place? Would you have dared to fly? Tell us in the comments. And share this with someone who loves stories of real, raw human resilience. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and keep rising.